Greetings, Audio Avengers. Welcome to the Marvelous TV Club, your headquarters for the most insightful and entertaining discussions of the latest episode of Marvel television. And that means it's time to ponder the harrowing and heartbreaking fourth episode of Loki, titled The Nexus Event. If you've listened to this show before, you know what makes us unique. It's the way we sort our discussions into three distinct shows. This helps us have more focused conversations and makes it easier for you, the listener, to remember the stuff we talked about. Storycast is live, and Maeve and Amanda reveal the themes driving this episode. This week was especially deep, as we delved into the idea that the quote-unquote natural order is a concept used by people in power to erase marginalized people that they fear, just the way the TVA treats variants, and also how the act of reclaiming history by the powerless from the powerful is an act of revolution, which Sylvie, Mobius, and B-15 demonstrated in their stories. On Monday, our character cast with Christine Kippens will dive into the minds of the characters themselves, though, fair warning, this is a holiday weekend, and work and travel schedules may not make it easy for us to sync up. So follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Insta at Marvelous TV Club to get the latest updates. But look, if we have to miss a week, rest assured, Character Cast will be back and better than ever for episode 5. And honestly, I never in a million years expected that we'd basically never miss an episode of the Marvelous TV Club, but it was definitely going to happen at some point. So if Justice Breyer retires tomorrow from the Supreme Court, I mean, look, Character Cast could be a casualty just because of the work Christine and I each do. So know that, don't sweat it. We'll be back with more from episode 5, but stay tuned to us on social if you want to keep up with what's going on. But enough of that speculation. Now it's time for this speculation. PonderVision. This is the show that tackles the most captivating conundrums raised by the episode and teases out their implications for the MCU and our own reality. I'm your host, producer, editor, social media maven, and more, Marc Faletti. And as always, on PonderVision, I'm joined by SIF's ball-busting legal counsel, Jesse Taylor. How's it going, my friend?
It's going, and I'm honored because it means I get to bust those balls over and over again. So, Mark, this week's episode gave me so many feelings in so many ways, but one of them was a nice, warm, nostalgic feeling. Because the Timekeepers, as we've discovered, turned out to be Chuck E. Cheese-style animatronic puppets. And my question for you, Mark, to start us off with something that's serious and weighty and thoughtful, what names would you give the Timekeeper animatronic puppets?
I'm so delighted that you took it into the animatronic puppet realm. I want to think now about the instruments each of them would play, you know, who's on the cymbals, you know, and who's got the like guitar thing where they just move their arm up and down. But I got the retro sci-fi vibe from them, right? Like old school, you know, mid-century science fiction films. And I feel like all retro sci-fi names end in EUS, like AUS. Like Morpheus, Dr. Zaius, that sort of shit.
Right.
So I was thinking that they all must be various forms of ASs. So here's what I landed on. The pencil neck dude, the main guy in the middle. There's no Latin word for pencil. I mean, you'll be shocked to learn what with them not having pencils. But
what?
But the Latin word for lead is apparently plumbum. I kid you not. Plumbum. So Plumbumius is my guy in the middle. And the mustache guy had some floppy-ass lips, so I just kind of went with Labius.
Okay.
And then the last guy, what the fuck was he even saying? So I went with Marble Mouthius.
I think you just invented a children's show.
Oh, God. I mean, I don't know. That sounds a little, you know, Labius is probably not, is going to get a rewrite for the children's show.
So I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about it from the perspective that it had that mid-century feel too, but some of it also had kind of a Stranger Things 80s feel, a little bit of neon, a little bit of smoke and mirrors. Mm-hmm. And also as an 80s kid myself, that's kind of what I feel like whenever I see animatronic puppets. So I went with old school Pac-Man names.
Oh, nice.
Inky, Blinky, and Clyde.
Is Clyde that last guy we can't understand?
Yes.
What the hell? Who thought that was good sound design? I had to turn the subtitles on even the third time I listened to it.
But here's my thought too. What if it was intentional? Because as anyone who's been to a Chuck E. Cheese knows, one of the robots is always broken down.
Right. It was clearly meant to be over the top because the mustache guy Labius in my universe, he was almost like a SpongeBob SquarePants character or something. It was so, Futurama-ish or something. I don't know.
Right. It was so ridiculous. And I love that they went that far with it.
Yes. Yeah.
And even looking at it, I couldn't tell. My initial thought was that it was bad CGI, which didn't make any sense. They aren't moving correctly. It just doesn't seem right. And then one of them just gets his head chopped off.
Yeah. Well, it was a hectic week for the Timekeepers, Jesse, but as you can tell from my character cast description, it's been a hectic week for us here. So on PonderVision, we're going a little freeform tonight. I love structure, which you can also tell because I never shut the fuck up about it in our intros. But the whole point of PonderVision is that it's a mind-bendy walk on the weird side. So in a way, this is the most on-brand way to do the show. And thus, this lack of structure, Jesse, is actually structure.
The most structure of all.
Yeah, exactly. Don't think about it too hard, though. Let's get into it. I want to start with a question for you, which is about the way Loki survived. I was shocked when he got pruned. I actually was so invested in the episode that I thought it very well could have happened and that was what we were watching. And then, of course, the mid-credit scene happened and Loki awoke. A lot of people seem to assume that just because Loki survived, Mobius and all of the other variants have survived too. I'm a little skeptical about that, though I also have a tough time believing we've lost Mobius forever. But how do you think pruning works at this point? And do you think everyone survives, or was this somehow special to Loki?
My first thought is that pruning is an example of the law of conservation of mass.
Oh.
And for those who aren't familiar with it, mass/matter can neither be created nor destroyed. There is as much of it as exists, and it will always exist in some form. It can convert. It can be unconverted. Is unconverted a word? I don't know, but we're doing science here.
Disuncombobula conversion.
A perfectly cromulent concept. And because mass can neither be created nor destroyed, it's hard to envision pruning as what we think of it as that it being the absolute destruction of someone from the timeline. But then there's also the question of what does being destroyed from the timeline, from the sacred timeline mean?
Yeah.
And if all pruning does is shunt you into what are in effect these garbage worlds, and not that I'm saying a world full of Lokis is a garbage world necessarily, but it's clear that it's something beyond a regular timeline. But if that's what pruning does, it would actually make a lot of sense, especially with what the TVA believes it is doing versus what it's actually doing, and what the TVA believes it is versus what it actually is. So at the end of the day, I do think there could be another Mobius world, but I have a feeling that because Lokis are Lokis and they are all the god of mischief, there is something that happens with pruning that directs all Lokis to one place, whereas Mobius might be... he might be on his dream world full of discarded jet skis, or he could just be in some random cafeteria where there's never a salad and never a cola.
The reason I got hung up on this, or it didn't occur to me initially that Mobius survived when Loki did, is because in the comics, Loki doesn't really die exactly. When Loki dies, he gets reborn. That's where Kid Loki comes from in the comics. So I guess I assumed that the way Loki survived prunings was that he sort of reappeared somewhere in the universe just because he's a god and he doesn't really die and he gets reinstantiated somehow. But either way, where he ended up looked like an apocalypse world. It looked like the end of a timeline, or maybe all time, because the Avengers building was just off to the right and it was totally bombed out. So they were definitely in New York City somewhere. And it does make sense that the best way to never cause any variation with these variants is to drop them at the end of time, the ultimate apocalypse. There's no timeline to break if you ditch them all somewhere where everything is ending. But it didn't originally make sense to me that you wouldn't just kill them. I hear you on the conservation of matter. That's cool science shit. That's what we're here for at PonderVision. But just story-wise, I was like, why wouldn't they at least kill them if they're trying to reduce the possibility of chaos in the universe? But that did lead me to a theory that maybe there's an end-of-time Loki who wants a bunch of people to rule when he's finally the king of Midgard. So we know they're on Earth. We know it's New York City. And maybe this is a situation where all these beings that get pruned are shipped off to this Loki's kingdom at the end of time, where he's finally the ruler of the ashes. And I guess here's the other thing, JT. That looked a lot like our time, which means the end of all things, or at least the end of Earth, might be a lot closer than we'd like.
I mean, it is. The Earth is kind of burning, and things aren't super great, and there's a pandemic. Like, we could very well be seeing a bunch of Lokis parade down the street any minute now.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Alligator Loki. I just hope he talks.
I think your theory also makes a lot of sense with how Loki was punished by Mobius, or how he was, I guess that was a form of sort of enhanced interrogation, to use a catchphrase from the early 2000s.
Mr. CIA memo over here.
Oh, R.I.P. Donald Rumsfeld.
Not really.
No. And if they found a way to use time to perpetually punish someone in a very psychological sense, it would actually make a lot of sense that from the TVA's perspective, they believe they're enacting some sort of final punishment, but really what they're doing is just sort of pushing it off to the sort of eternity of punishment for anyone who is deemed unworthy of being in the sacred timeline. It also then raises some questions about all of the various TVA agents that Sylvie pruned last week when she invaded the TVA. So did she actually kill any of them?
Yeah, maybe they're all running around on Loki World. And I hadn't thought about it until we were talking about it just now. But the rainbow coloring of the pruning does remind me of the Rainbow Bridge a bit, Jesse. So maybe there is some teleportation signaling there by virtue of the rainbow bright vibes we get when everyone gets disappeared.
And something I'm interested to know, was C20 pruned or was she killed?
Or is she killed at all? We know Mobius lied about Sylvie. Maybe C20's still kicking around somewhere too, and Renslayer kept her around and just didn't want Mobius to see her. So she lied and said she had been eliminated.
Layers within layers.
That's the TVA for you.
And speaking of some layers that we love to see, that's a terrible segue. I'm going with it though. The layers of love. Do you believe that Loki is actually in love with Sylvie? Or is it a different kind of emotional connection?
I definitely think there are two readings of this. One is that Sylvie represents that possibility for good that Mobius referenced that is within Loki. She is committed and focused. She fights for a just cause. So I think falling for Sylvie is a clever device that's really showing us a Loki breaking through his self-loathing to love himself, to believe that the best of himself is possible. But I do watch the way he looks at her and the sheer anxiety that he has for her actual well-being, and it does seem like love to me. Because if it was just about him learning how to love himself, then just knowing that she existed would probably be enough. Loving her memory would still help him love himself, whatever, all that stuff. But he cares about her well-being in that way that I think signals something real. How did you perceive it? Was there something more or less going on for you?
I thought something different. It's definitely a deep emotional connection, but one of my biggest pet peeves about television is how quickly love happens. Mm-hmm. Because in real life, love does not happen over the span of a day. Right. You can have infatuation, you can have deep caring or concern, but what you don't have is what I would consider actual true love. Now, there's the intensity of having been through an apocalypse. There's the special circumstance of both of them being gods, and both of them being variations on the same god. Mm-hmm. So I can give that a little leeway in terms of whether it's love or something else. But I also think there's something in terms of what Loki sees in Sylvie that's different from romantic love. And how I viewed it was not just that love, but also a level of respect, almost. Sylvie managed to turn that monomaniacal focus that Loki's always had on his latest scheme, his latest plot, and turn it into something that was aimed at basically the central power in the universe. And in Loki's mind, this entire episode, she almost succeeded. And in fact, when they were in that chamber, as far as he knew, she had succeeded, or at least she had succeeded in taking down whatever the image of the Timekeepers was that existed.
Mm-hmm.
So to the extent that Loki sees himself in Sylvie, I think that he's not just in love with her. I think he's also looking at her as kind of the best version of himself, which is kind of a hell of a thing to experience in the span of a week or a month or however long it is he's been at the TVA, in the same episode where he also had the emotional breakthrough about how he deserves to be alone.
Well, I think there's only one way to resolve this, Jesse, and that is that I have just looked up a cosmopolitan quiz that answers the question, are you in love? So I would like you to take the place of Loki, to do your best to answer this quiz on behalf of Loki, based on what we know about him, but you get to make the final decision. So I'm going to ask you these questions. I will select the answers, and we will determine through the scientifically proven method of Cosmo whether or not Loki is in love with Sylvie. My first question.
First of all, may I ask, how old is this quiz?
Looks like 2019, but who can say on the internet? I mean, I think it's quite possible that, this has been updated. But I will say the language here is, sounding like what at least Cosmo imagines Gen Z is talking about when they are crushing on somebody.
Okay,
so be prepared. Here we go. I have no idea what these questions are. I just pulled this up because I was like, well, I know how to answer this question. So Jesse/Loki, what first drew you to your crush? Answer A. I mean, have you seen them? They're so hot. Or B. They're like the funniest person I've ever met and I can legit talk to them for hours.
I have to go with B over A.
Strong agree, right? I mean, even though I don't know that Sylvie is hilarious, she definitely is someone he can talk to.
Right. We had the train scene. We know that they can talk for literally until the end of time.
That's deep, man. You should write Cosmo quizzes, Jesse. All right, no. Look.
How do you know I don't?
Oh my God, you're blowing my mind, Jesse. What if you set me up for this all along? Question 2. How often do you hang out with them or stay over? A, it's at most twice a week and only at night. Or B, pretty often we're close friends.
B.
Yeah, pretty often. They really haven't been apart for
since they met, except when they got captured.
Yeah, and even then it was like struggling to fight their way back to each other.
Right.
Question 3. How often do you text each other? A, pretty randomly, TBH, and usually only to make plans. Or B, not constantly because that'd be annoying, but when something reminds me of them, I hit them up, and I don't worry about texting too often.
So if we think about the TemPad as a phone, they fought over the one phone they had and then broke it. So I have to go with A over B.
I'm literally choking on my laughter over here. Incredible. When do you usually find yourself thinking about your crush? A, whenever I'm bored. Or B, throughout the day, just anytime something reminds me of them, which ends up being a lot.
Oh, hard B.
Hard B. Hard B. If your crush texted you right now, what would it be about? A, what time we're meeting up this week. B, some dumb meme they'll know I love.
A.
Yeah.
It's a time travel show.
Time travel show. That's a deep answer. When you picture your crush in your head, what do they look like? A, either naked or in a really A+ outfit. Or B, for some reason, them lying on my bed and laughing so hard at a joke is particularly stuck in my brain. Damn, they were cute.
B.
Yeah, I think that's right. Although Sylvie does have an A+ outfit, but I agree. He imagines her being charmed by his wit more than anything, right?
Exactly.
What do you like best about your crush? A, is it bad if I say how good they are at hooking up? Or B, IDK, they're just kind of the best person I know in a lot of ways.
Well, since Loki is the best person Loki knows in a lot of ways, it's got to be B.
91% of answers chose B for this quiz, just FYI.
Oh, wow.
We have 4 more, Jesse.
Okay.
How has your relationship with this person changed over the past few months? A, they know what I want in bed now, which is great. Or B, we talk more. I feel more comfortable around them.
B.
How does this person feel about you? Hard to say, but they definitely think I'm hot. Or they make it obvious they're as into me as I am into them, and I don't think they'd lie.
A.
Yeah.
And I have to say, when we saw Loki about to bare his soul in the Timekeeper's chambers, and Sylvie was just like, what are you doing and why are you doing this right now? That's an A.
Outstanding textual read to connect to our Cosmo quiz. Loki/Jesse, what's your dream date with this person? A, we book a trip and get a hotel room all to ourselves and do whatever we want. Or B, honestly, I don't care. Hanging out with them is great in any context.
A. And the reason I pick A is because they get to do whatever they want.
Yes, I totally agree. Although I feel like if I switched out context for apocalypse, that last one gets more interesting.
Yes.
Final question, Jesse. How do your friends react when you talk about this person? A, I don't really bring them up much to my friends. B, they let me ramble because they're good and supportive friends who want me to be happy. I feel like this is talking about Mobius, Jesse. What does Mobius think?
Okay, I need the answers again.
All right, sorry. A, I don't really bring them up much to my friends. I'm pretty skeptical Loki doesn't talk about Sylvie much. Right. B, they let me ramble because they're good and supportive friends who want me to be happy.
B, I mean, Loki and Mobius's entire relationship is based around Sylvie. It has to be B.
Yeah, and they talk about her as his girlfriend. And notice that when Mobius called her his girlfriend, Loki was like, didn't flinch at that. He was like, that's fine.
Yeah.
Here we go. All right. The results are that Loki is in love. Eek, I hate to break it to you, but you're disgustingly, ridiculously in love with Sylvie. Doesn't it suck? Isn't it wonderful? Can you even believe some of the outrageous thoughts you're having? Well, believe it. Love is rare and special, and it doesn't come all the time. For most people anyway. Embrace all those puke-inducing feelings, both good and bad, and Loki, have fun.
Oh, and unfortunately, his balls don't work anymore because he was kneed 5,000 times by Sif.
Yeah, talk about panic-inducing. Oh, man. So that's where the internet landed on that question. Well, if I can take it to the real place, Jesse, I have a simple follow-up question for you. This is not from Cosmo. This is just from me. Does love always make you a better person?
I don't think so. And I think because there's many kinds of love, and there's also many ways to embody and realize that love. And you could see a version of love with Loki, who is in many ways obsessive and narcissistic, as he admitted, and who is in love with a time-shifted / temporally displaced version of himself, where the love isn't a reflection of his appreciation for another person. The love is a reflection of his appreciation for himself. And it spurs him back into being 2012 Avengers fascist Loki, or into being a different kind of selfish Loki. Just because you're in love doesn't necessarily make you selfless or a better person. It just makes you in love with someone else.
Yeah, I went back and forth on whether the idea of needing someone, which is what drives a lot of, I think, the terrible behavior that we associate with love gone wrong, and love itself are one and the same. Because the love part, if it's pure, is pretty inherently selfless to me. And the generosity and the patience of that feeling also seem inherent to it. The problem is that you are always walking a knife's edge of that. It could easily spill into obsession or codependence or paranoia, any of that. So I think in the abstract, the answer is kind of yes, but that in practice, the specific form that it takes is never simple. It's always complicated. And so I think because many of those complications can bring downsides and bad behavior and jealousies and all that stuff, yeah, I don't know that it always makes you a better person.
And I'd agree with that. And especially when you have, in this case, love forged in a time of crisis. Is it love driven by adrenaline and panic and necessity and need? Will it go away once they're calm or once they each have different things to focus on? Is it going to be love tinged by jealousy or even hatred, depending on whether their purposes ever cross? We don't know.
Yeah, it's like Ned and Betty in Spider-Man, right? You get together for a summer, it doesn't mean it's forever.
Right. The most mature relationship in the MCU.
Certainly up there. It's a low bar.
So speaking of love and what I sort of treat as a very pure love, you and Mobius.
Yeah, buddy. I enjoy playing along with this, but you guys have always oversold this for me. I'm willing to get into character and be into it, but I am feeling good about it right now. So yes.
Yes, and you should. You should. And that's why we have to make fun of you, because we have to oversell it.
Yeah, no, I'm into it. Anyway, sorry, I took you off track.
No problem. Based on what little we know about Mobius's background and the fact that he's a variant, presume for a second that Mobius does go to a land of Mobii, or some sort of place where he can live out his best life. What do you think Mobius's real life was like? Like, what was peak Mobius before he became a TVA agent?
Yeah, it's got to be something from that late 80s to mid 90s era. And we know that Mobius is an analytical guy, but he's also a bit of a follower. I think he likes to go with the flow. He would do, I think, what is expected of him. So I imagine he was a frat guy in college, but one of the few harmless ones that you actually liked when you met in your classes. And if frats weren't your thing, which they certainly weren't my thing, you were like, that guy's fine. He definitely loved jet skis, and all of that added up to me to say that I think Mobius might have been a finance bro.
Okay.
And he might have been working for one of those big firms that is not unlike the TVA. But as soon as he uncovered some shady shit, he turned on them and brought them down. And maybe that's his variation. Maybe he broke Goldman Sachs. We already saw Goldman Sachs referenced in the TVA. I just thought that maybe Mobius getting to the bottom of things and breaking his own heart about the institution that he thought he loved was part of who he was in any space. But I don't know. I don't love that answer.
Well, I'm going to run with this for a second, and I'm going to give you a specific event that would be placed right in Mobius's timeline.
Oh my God. Is it Enron?
No. Did Mobius create the savings and loan crisis of the late 80s?
Holy shit. I mean, talk about things that had massive consequences upon consequences, a multiverse, if you will, of financial tragedies as a result of that. Do you imagine him being a sinister manipulator of the financial markets, or how does that work?
Well, I think that his path would be similar to what his TVA path was, where he was a true believer, did his job, did it well, middle management guy. My knowledge of finance extends about as far as my local bank, so I can't tell you what anyone in the 80s would have been doing in the savings and loan crisis. But, guy, competent, like you were saying, good at his job, figured out something bad was going on, didn't believe it for a while, then did believe it, blew the whistle, and blew up an industry. And maybe his Nexus event, his branching timeline, is sometimes he decides to do it, sometimes he doesn't. Maybe sometimes he gets killed by somebody else in the course of doing that. Maybe sometimes he tells the wrong person, or he tells too many people. You could see any number of paths that could go. And also, him being kind of a mid-level finance bro would give him enough money to have jet skis.
Right.
Late 80s, what are you going to be obsessed with? Salads. You're going to be obsessed with salads and energy drinks.
It was like the beginning of the health food craze.
Exactly. Probably, I don't know, was Tybo in existence in the late 80s?
Would certainly have been in the 90s at some point, right? By the time Josta Cola came out, I kept tying Josta Cola to 85. It's 1995. Someone on Twitter corrected me, and I thank you very much, because a lot was connected to 1985, but Josta is around in the mid 90s, and so I feel like Tybo has a lot in common with that phase.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the Wikipedia page. Billy Blanks developed it in 1976.
Oh my God. That's as old as me.
But he mass marketed it in the 90s. So I could even see Mobius being an early adopter of Tybo, like maybe before it became a big phase. But I did some Tybo, had a salad, had some low-fat dressing that had a ton of sugar in it, didn't know that wasn't necessarily the best thing for you, slammed a Josta, and then went back to, running spreadsheets or whatever you did in the late 80s, early 90s.
My left field answer to this, Jesse, is that I can see Mobius being a totally chill stoner who basically never gets off his ass. Because he throws me some dude vibes when he's talking to people from time to time, like the whole exchange with Renslayer about, I like looking at you from, looking up to you, what's appropriate and all that stuff. Just, he has a sort of blasé quality to him that strikes me as like that 90s stoner caricature. And I like the idea that every once in a while, there's a Mobius who just gets a stick up his ass to start doing shit. And that's his variation, is that when he gets some kind of ambition behind his own analytical mind, that's when he causes trouble.
Can I give you my left field answer?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mobius / Owen Wilson does have that stoner vibe, but do you know where that vibe also works for someone who's maybe smart, cares about people, but also likes being in a system?
Where?
Public high school. A public high school teacher, maybe Franklin Delano Roosevelt High School.
Dude, he totally... Oh, wow. Yeah, he even throws me some Mr. Rosso vibes from Freaks and Geeks. That's the long-haired guidance counselor from that show, and is always both really invested in the kids, but also has a weird try-hard energy that can be a little off-putting that Mobius sometimes I feel like has going on. Okay, yeah. Teaching at Franklin Delano Roosevelt High School. That's a great callback, man.
Yeah. And it would also make a lot of sense that he likes eating a sad lunch in a cafeteria if he's a high school teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. True.
Yeah.
So Mobius finally got to meet the Timekeepers. And as we've discussed, they're fucking robots and not that good at being robots. So my whole old Loki theory about the founding of the TVA went up in smoke, Jesse. You heard my theory a little bit about the end of time Loki, but it's not really coherent in terms of who maybe was potentially controlling those timekeepers or installed them or any of that. Do you have a current theory about who, if anyone, will turn out to be the TVA Wizard of Oz?
What I thought about was the fact that these androids were old. They were old. They didn't seem to function very well. Could the TVA be something that we find out was put in place however many eons ago, and it's just gone based on the strength of its own bureaucracy? We find out it was something that was set up, abandoned, and we've just sort of been going with it. And maybe the TVA has no real point, or maybe the TVA has a point, but the point is in seeing how far it will go as opposed to it actually pruning or managing any given timeline.
That does fit with the religiosity of it all, the unknowable nature of the origin of this thing. All the talk about the TVA in those first couple episodes really struck me. It was Catholic. We talked about that. But it would be fitting to never really get that answer. And I think both you and Christine had talked about the value of the empty room. And while we technically saw these timekeepers, the empty room theory is still 100% alive because we might never get an answer. I was hung up on the question of that, though, because of the way the other two robots laughed when the third one, when Plumbummius in my universe got his head cut off. So it felt like there was some real-time responsiveness, but it's tough to know what kind of system they're running on. I had a follow-up question a little bit on this, though, Jesse. So one of the popular Reddit theories is that it's Kang the Conqueror because Kang is creating the series of events that he needs in order to take over the universe. But what feels fucked up to me about that idea is that if you control the TVA, you functionally already do rule the universe. So what are even the goals of somebody controlling something like this? So you already have time under your thumb. Is there any possible way that is merely a means to an end? Is that not, Jesse, the ultimate end?
That's my exact thought. You already have the organization that controls it, and it's reactive, which means it's fundamentally preserving something. It's not going out and doing anything unless there's an argument that every time spike, Nexus event, all of this rigmarole that's been set up to justify the TVA jumping into action is being controlled on some end. But again, it just seems like an incredibly elaborate way to do it, especially when you have to rely on hundreds of other people. The more complex a scheme gets, the more areas there are for it to fall apart. The more cogs you have in a machine, the worse off you are when one cog breaks.
Yeah.
And in this case, the cogs are just breaking left and right.
Oh, I think I'm rooting for your empty room theory at this point, or some version of my whole Loki did it to give himself a population at the end of time. But even that feels a little convoluted and cute for me.
Now, speaking of controlling time, One of the things in this episode that came up that was a big area of Loki's interrogation, but then we never got an answer about, what caused that time spike on Lamentis? They were in an apocalypse, and all the Lokis were doing, all Loki and Sylvie were doing, was kind of holding hands and maybe about to smooch. Is that big enough to cause the biggest time spike we've ever seen? And if so, is that just a metaphor for Loki's penis?
Well, I made it all my erection jokes on Storycast. I'm regretting it now because I feel like making so many more. But for out of respect for all the listeners who've already done the wonderful thing of listening to Storycast, I will not continue down that road. I will instead play my originalist role. I will return us to the text, which is where Mobius said, and I quote, "Whatever that connection was could bring the whole thing down." So it does seem about the fact that they were holding hands, and it does seem like it's about the fact that they were maybe about to smooch, but it can't just be the relationship, especially because, as we talked about, it's not just a love thing. But I think there's a particular cocktail going on, the connection. What I break that apart into are two pieces, which is self-esteem that is happening for our Loki and the optimism that is growing inside of Sylvie. In a way, they're the salve for each other's weakness, and they're healing each other, which I think creates some endless possibilities for the universe. Because imagine what they could do together, just the possibility of them teaming up, being unrestrained by their baggage and their trauma and their self-loathing, and just let loose as forces of nature. I would probably take them as a team against almost anyone we've met in the MCU, provided that we're talking about this self-realized version of each one of them. So that's kind of what I took away from it as the time spike. But there are a lot of theories floating around. What do you land on?
I come back to the fact that I don't believe time spikes are what they've been portrayed to be. And so if the time spike is not actually a divergence from the sacred timeline, but instead a threat to whoever runs the TVA and whoever's behind all of this, then, are they just sitting in their office with a dial that's basically, I'm going to crank it up and crank it up and crank it up to make people think this is the most dangerous thing that's ever existed? Because once Loki and Sylvie came back, TVA was in full lockdown. Everyone was on red alert, because they knew that these were such dangerous variants that they had to be treated in that way. Mm-hmm. And if, as you say, their healing with each other is going to create this threat / this power, then yeah, go ahead and set off the alarm. Make everyone believe this is a 5-alarm fire. All hands on deck. Because it has to be stopped. Not because it's going to ruin the sacred timeline, but because it's going to ruin the plans behind whoever has made the TVA believe there's a sacred timeline.
Well, damn it. Now you make me think that there is somebody running this whole TVA operation. This is the loop. We're in our own loop here where it's like there's so much stuff pointing it out. I was just shocked by the idea that the variations could behave differently. And it's so tough to know what to make of that. And I assume that by pulling them off Lamentis, that potentially they stopped that variation. But I'm skeptical of that too, because if it's the connection, quote unquote, that made the variation, then the act of simply removing them from the current situation doesn't feel like it would stop that connection. Therefore, the variation could still be proceeding. But maybe it's because the TVAs in the quantum realm are sitting outside of time or whatever that doesn't technically happen. Or maybe their weird-ass tech doesn't really reach into their own space. I don't know. I loved your Winamp comment. Jesse texted me today about how the temp pads look like a Winamp skin. And if anyone is old enough to remember Winamp, that is the best and most exciting nostalgia I've had for all the nostalgia moments I've had in the show. Thinking about that as a Winamp skin was way up there. So thank you, Jesse.
And Mark found the exact Winamp skin I was thinking of freakishly fast.
Neon orange. Yeah, there's a whole Winamp archive. I had just had my first job when Winamp was a thing. And so, of course, I was downloading every Winamp skin that I could find for my desktop. I easily went through 40 or 50 Winamps And because, this was at the height of Napster. So it was a way to play MP3s that you downloaded illegally from various shady sites. And so having that player, I kind of missed that. I wish Spotify or Apple Music or whatever had that customization, that skinning quality. You could even sell them at this point. Everybody's monetizing the shit out of cosmetic changes. Let me buy some Winamp style skins for my digital music player, Jesse.
I know, because we don't buy ringtones anymore. We stream everything based on subscription. That could be the one area where you just get to, spend 99 cents every so often and get your Loki skin or get your whatever skin.
Oh, man. Well, speaking of going into the past, poor Loki went into the past this episode over and over and over and over again. I was tempted to ask you about what time cell prison would you be put in, but that just sounded like no fun at all. I was
Right.
like, look, we can take it to the serious place from time to time on PonderVision, but I felt like that was just a hair shirt that I did not want to put on. So, forget being time punished, Jesse. Is there someone or some moment that you'd love to be the time punisher for? In other words, is there a moment from your life where you want to be the Sif of it, where you just keep delivering retribution over and over and over again?
There's a moment in my life that I'm actually proud of. And it's when I got in a fight in a church.
Wow, tell me more.
So I went to Catholic school from 1st through 12th grade. And this was 7th grade. I just started at Catholic junior high. And we were having an assembly. And because it's a Catholic school, the only place that's large enough to have an assembly is the church. And there was a kid in our class who was going around just being a jerk to everybody during the presentation, or during the presentation. And I remember he was making fun of a girl I had a crush on, and then he started making fun of me. And then I think he said something about how, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's something along the lines of, oh, Jesse's feeling himself in church. And I think I'd said something about feeling, so he turned it into that. He was just kind of the biggest jerk I'd ever met. And I got fed up with it. So I punched him in the middle of church. And then we got in a fight all the way down the row of pews into the middle.
Wow.
Until the priest and the 8th graders had to pull me off of him.
Okay.
But everyone loved that I did it because this guy was a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the best feelings I've had. Not that I advocate violence and not that I advocate violence in a church, but sometimes it's not too bad.
Yeah, he's your personal Biff, it sounds like.
Exactly.
So where did you punch him?
I think in the head. Again, it's one of those things,
Same.
And then I think I put him in a chokehold for a while. Like, I don't remember this. It was just kind of a blur.
Was it that thing where you're kind of not seeing red exactly, but just it's like that blur of like you're so amped up and the adrenaline's rushing?
Exactly. That's why I never believe anybody who says they can remember a fight and exactly what happened in a fight. I've been in, I think, 2 fights in my life, that one and one other one. And I can't remember what happened in both because it's just so immediate and there's so much adrenaline and energy going on that you're just doing stuff. And I don't know that you're consciously thinking about any of it.
I think that's right. So my loop is kind of also a thing from the past, also a thing from childhood. So I want to talk about this dude I grew up with or knew in middle school very well, named Ben. Okay, so I doxed the hell out of this kid during recording, but upon reflection, not cool. So you're going to hear these beeps whenever I first start doxing him. I didn't realize it. Jesse basically starts teasing me / calling me out for it. And I doubled down because that's how salty I am about this kid. But in retrospect, of course, I shouldn't dox this kid. Ben, you know who you are. And please enjoy the rest of this story. So Ben and I were not quite best friends. I had a best friend at the time named Nathan, but Ben and I were real tight. Nathan was like a couple grades behind me. So in terms of classmates, Ben and I was the closest person I had in my grade. And we were real tight, hanging out after school most days. We were both in band at the time. We did lots of stuff together, sleepovers, all that shit, right? And during 6th grade, which was my last year in this place. So I was in Urbandale, Iowa, which is a suburb of Des Moines. And we were walking down Aurora Avenue on our way back from middle school. He lived closer to the middle school than I did. So we would walk and he would split off and then I would finish my walk home. So as we got to the spot where he turns off, he just turned to me and said, "Hey, I cannot be cool as long as we're friends. Like, we have to stop being friends. I need to be cool. You are extremely uncool and I cannot be friends with you anymore." And I was in shock when this dude said that. So I think I was just rationalizing and trying to bargain with this, being like, can we be friends in secret or what? You know, like I had no awesome response. I did not pull a Sif in that moment. So, you know, he was basically just like hard no. And I think we said like 2 words to each other again for the rest of our lives. The next year I moved to Texas and that was it, man. And I would love to show adult Ben what a shit thing that was to do to another kid.
Wow.
So I don't get a chance to kick him in the balls over and over again, but I would like him to have to experience that moment. So Ben, if you're listening, I forgive you. I mean, I don't, not really, not in my heart, but I will say that I do so that I look like a really mature person. So I forgive you. No, I don't.
Wow. And see, Mark, I didn't call out my dude by name.
Ben,
you called out
Benjamin. Don't remember his middle name, but that's his name.
Good Lord, Mark.
What?
I love vengeful you.
Yeah, it stuck with me.
It's a good look on you.
Is it? I don't know. It's a look.
Okay. Now, getting off the Ben train, based on what we've seen in the trailers, we know that at some point there's going to be a President Loki / a candidate Loki. He's got the green suit, yellow shirt, the big stars and stripes pin on his jacket. Is Loki going to become the president of Lokis in Loki world? And would he be a good president of Lokis? And I mean both the current Loki, who's still somewhat damaged, and maybe the fully realized Loki, who could have Sylvie kind of teach him some ways of being a leader, perhaps.
I appreciate your optimism given the state of New York City that we saw that he landed in. Could he be a good president of Loki? Well, the fact that the entire world is completely bombed out, I feel like my answer is no, but I must be missing something, Jesse. What is the case? Or do you have a case for him being a good president?
So I do not have a good case for him being president. He'd be a terrible fucking president. One, because he has the full-on horns back again.
Yes.
Can you imagine a president whose head can't fit through a door?
Not a lot of ADA compliance in a bombed out New York City, unfortunately.
And I also have to imagine that all he really cares about is looking good, which again, actually might make him a good mayor of New York City, but not necessarily a president.
Okay. Well, I want to end on this last question for you, Jesse, because the whole episode ends on this huge cliffhanger that we just met all these other Lokis. Who knows where Loki is when he reformed? And it's kind of killing everybody to wait for more. So I'm curious about whether it's better for this show to be weekly or whether you wish you could binge it all in one shot a la Netflix. What's the better way for us to consume this kind of content?
100% weekly.
Okay.
And maybe part of it is being older, being part of the, Gen X / Oregon Trail generation. We've talked about this before. But we grew up where TV was on once a week and you had to be in front of the TV at the time the thing was on in order to see the show, or else you just missed it until a rerun came on several months later. Now, I don't want to get into that aspect of things were better back in my day, blah, blah, blah. But what I don't like about the binging model is the fact that it's very easy to lose focus on a show. If something like this comes out, it will ultimately be roughly 6 hours of content once every episode's said and done. And if you're watching this all in a row, those big moments, those emotional beats, that anticipation, you don't build that because you can just move right on to the next one. Eventually, this will be streaming. Once this is over, you can watch all 6 episodes in a row. But for right now, it creates an experience, and it's an experience we can share. And selfishly, we wouldn't have this show if it were streaming show in the Netflix style where we could watch every episode. We couldn't have 6 different podcasts about this show because we just watch it all and then we say, oh, that was good. I like the ending where, I don't know, a toaster's in charge of the TVA or whatever it turns out to be.
Miss Minutes is the boss. I think Christine's leaning that direction, but anyway.
Ooh, I like that. And Miss Minutes does have a good Twitter account.
Yes.
Strong
slightly
Twitter presence.
Unhinged, super enjoyable Twitter account.
Yeah. Now, what about you?
You're right that we wouldn't have this show. I was trying to think about whether there was any Netflix show that has the kind of weekly podcasts that exist for these Marvel shows. It's not just us. There's a bunch of stuff out there, obviously. You know, I'm a big fan of the Stranded Panda stuff, and there are a couple other great ones. But you don't have a Witcher, podcast audience. You don't have a Shadow and Bone podcast audience. You have podcasts that have talked about those shows, but you can't build up a sort of communal experience when everybody has watched it all. Everybody who cares about it passionately has watched it all in a weekend, and other people are finding it in all these weird ways. So yeah, it creates the possibility of appointment viewing again. I personally think anticipation is basically the most delicious and underrated part of the human experience, right? The possibilities are what are intoxicating. So before a sporting event, especially an important one for whatever team you root for, the most exciting thing is the build up to the game. The game itself is often a harrowing event that you kind of, lose parts of your, you age 20 years in the course of that game, but the build up to the game is so exciting. Or just the excitement of seeing someone you haven't seen in a while after you've been apart. The reveal of something special or any of that. I even think about the Marvel movies themselves, Jesse. They were always the most anticipated pop culture event for me, but the stakes were always actually almost too high because there were only like 3 of them a year. So for example, if I saw the Eternals trailers, which have not excited me thus far, I would be super nervous that movie was going to crash and burn, and then I'd basically have wasted one of these rare little moments that I get to be excited about something. But now with these shows, I'm getting that rush every week, maybe obviously to a slightly lesser degree, but that's probably a healthier degree. And also it means, frankly, if and when, and I think eventually when, one of these shows really misses the mark for me, I'm not going to be upset about it because I've got so much more to look forward to. There's always more anticipation around the corner. It's like waiting for comic books when we were kids in the first place, getting that new issue.
Right. And so many things that you just described are basic elements of great narratives.
Yeah.
You think about how many shows you've watched, the will they or won't they plot lines, the big reveals, the anticipation of will the scheme be unveiled, will it succeed, will it fail? And the binge watching model kind of takes that all away because you can also just skip to the end. I can just go watch the last episode first, figure out what happens to everybody, and then go back and watch it develop. And there's pleasure in that. Yes. If it's a good show, it's a good show. But you lose a lot, I think, in that model. You lose a lot of that anticipation. You lose a lot of that discussion and community that you build up. And, even thinking about Netflix, the show on Netflix I'm most excited to see is The Great British Bake Off, because they release a new episode every Friday.
Interesting.
Yeah. And last thing I'll say about this, I often feel with the Netflix binge model that I don't need to necessarily watch a show at any given time. I still haven't watched The Witcher because there was nothing about it that I missed out on by not watching it the day it premiered, as opposed to watching it right now, as opposed to watching it next year. It'll be there. And it's not as if I missed out on the Game of Thrones style theorizing and anticipation. I just missed out on watching Henry Cavill be swole, which, I saw Mission Impossible Fallout and I saw Superman. I've seen it before.
I will say I did watch The Witcher finally. I also waited way too long because there was no cultural touch point to it. This is exactly what you're saying, right? Like I said, nobody was like, have you seen The Witcher yet in my life? But I did finally watch it and I enjoyed it. It was actually pretty good. And I think if it had been week to week, it would have built more of a following behind it because it's big budget, it's well acted, there's some timey-wimey shit that's really cool and surprising in it, but all people remember at most is the fact that song toss a coin to your Witcher was a big deal for like 2 weeks, and then that's
Yeah.
it. Whereas we had, it was Agatha all along, and plus a zillion other things. So
Yeah.
I feel like the question has been answered.
And if Henry Cavill is listening, I do think you're a great actor, and I enjoyed watching you build a computer. No shade to Henry Cavill.
No, great. Seems like a pretty good guy.
Yeah.
I hope he gets out of his DC contract and comes over to the MCU.
I know.
I don't know. Jesse, thank you so much for this conversation. Sorry about getting vengeful in the middle there. Thanks for rolling with that. If people want to talk to you about what a vengeful weirdo I am, where can they find and follow you?
They can find and follow me on Twitter at Jesse L. Taylor and on Substack at Action Figure Birthday.
Yeah, definitely check out Jesse's newsletter. It's just so much fun, and I wait for it with bated breath every time. So, podcast powerhouses, that's our show for today. We will keep you posted on whether we can pull off a character cast on Monday. So follow us on your favorite social platform at Marvelous TV Club to stay in touch with us on that. And then we'll be here to break down the next episode of Loki on Thursday with Storycast, then PonderVision on Saturday, and 100% another character cast after that. So if you're enjoying our show, leave us that 5-star Apple review so we can rise in those search rankings. It would mean the world to us because that's the whole way this algorithm universe works. So if you want to talk to me some more directly, you can join me at the Marvelous TV Club Facebook page or Twitter or Instagram. You can email us through the website, marveloustvclub.com. And of course, follow me on Twitter at Marc Faletti. That's Mark with a C, F as in Frank, Aletti. All right, Jesse, let's go see if Frog Thor is running around anywhere.
Oh, what about Beta Ray Bill?
He's definitely going to be in Love and Thunder.
Oh, I can't wait.